This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Howdy.
Hi, Brian. Hi, everybody. My name is Morris, and that fellow on the other side is Brian. We are your hosts, all two of them, both of us. We are hosts for Dream Idiots.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. Did we decide that we are the Dream Idiots, or this is Dream Idiots? I can't remember. We have to decide that at some point.
It is all encompassing. It is
Right.
it is all and everything all at once. Thanks a lot, folks, for the reviews. We've gotten a slew of reviews the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, a couple of good, 2 or 3 good new ones. Kelly in Kelly in Indiana or Illinois, and then
Illinois, I think. Yeah.
Illinois, and one was from the folks at the Gruesome and Something podcast, Gruesome and Unnatural podcast, gave us a review.
Oh, yes, that's right.
So
yes.
yeah, so and
Thank you
give
for
us some
reaching out.
5 stars. Yeah, so thanks for doing that. We appreciate you listening and sharing and doing all those good things. And please keep sharing and posting and behaving like Dream Idiots gives your life meaning. That means a lot.
And thanks again to all the listeners who participated in last week's idioms segment that you did for us. That was awesome.
I have stunningly more. I frankly have too many. I have at least enough for one more, probably 2 more already, and people keep sending them to me. So I have at least 30 or 40 left.
Do it.
So we'll roll out some more idioms here, some of which, there are a lot of idioms that were offered up that are pretty common, and it's us and common and routine expressions. Some might be interesting because of their history, but we like the ones that are just ridiculous and profane and sort of stupid. So we have a mix, but there's definitely some gems in there which we'll offer up down the road. You can find us online, Facebook and Instagram. We're at Dream Idiots. You can email us at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com and reach out and just say hi or give us some ideas for what to do down the road.
Speaking of roads, this is episode 66.
Mhm.
And it is that means I'm going first because it's an even number. And I'm going to ask you, Brian, where do you go to get your kicks?
Well, Route 66.
Brian, I'm so proud of you because if the answer had been anywhere other than that, I would have labeled you a pervert. That is true. This is episode 66. So I am for Route 66. I'm covering that great American institution, Route 66, also known as the Mother Road, which ties into Mother's Day, which was just
Nice, yeah.
yesterday, as today is Monday and we're recording. So yes, you are not a pervert, as far as I know, Brian, for picking Route 66. John Steinbeck gave it that name. Did you know that? Calling it the Mother Road?
No, I didn't know that. No.
Steinbeck gave it that appellation. It is over 2,000 miles of asphalt, which wound its way from Lakeshore Drive in Chicago to the Santa Monica Pier. In between Illinois and California, the highway also passed through Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It's also known as America's Main Street. From 1926 through the late 1960s, Route 66 was a primary artery for travel from the Midwest to the West Coast. And for many during America's Dust Bowl, it was the path to California. And that's where Steinbeck dubbed it there in his book, The Grapes of Wrath. He chronicled such a trip along what would have been Route 66. But as the major interstate highway system, as we've talked about, took hold, Route 66, once gorged with travelers, became merely a side road and a remnant of America's past. Towns which once prospered on a steady stream of motorists slowly dried up as people hit the major interstates instead of what was Route 66. I had the opportunity to travel a little bit of Route 66 on my last drive back to Colorado from Texas through Amarillo.
Mhm.
Didn't even realize I was on a part of it on historic 66, but it was a really neat kind of doing that. So I thought I'd kind of talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff about Route 66 that makes it such an American institution. Hopefully it's stuff that's brand new to you. Let's start off by talking about the way it exists in popular culture. We already mentioned the song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66. And you probably remember the TV program. You may have even seen a couple episodes of it. Do you know about the TV program?
No idea.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there was a TV program that ran on CBS from 1960 to 1964
Called Route 66?
Yeah, called
Okay.
Route 66. And it told the story of two young men searching for themselves, their identity
Mhm.
in America. And they traveled the byways in a Chevy Corvette. So it should come as no surprise that Chevy was a major sponsor of the program for its entire run. Now, Route 66 was a backdoor pilot. Do you know what that is, Bryan? A backdoor pilot?
No.
Okay. Well,
Mid-season replacement? No. What is a
no,
backdoor
no.
pilot?
Well, your status as a pervert is kind of up in the air, so be careful with how you do this. Basically, what a backdoor pilot is in the middle of another show, you might have a bunch of characters come in the middle of a storyline, or you might take a character out of that show and put them in a different situation as a way to test out, hey, would this be a good story or a group of characters that would make a good show unto itself?
Like, Laverne and Shirley on Happy Days.
Right. Or Different World on The Cosby Show.
Right.
Which, Cosby Show's not problematic these days, but they had an episode where the daughter went to visit a college. The daughter went to visit a college campus, and you got introduced to all the main characters, and that became Different World. There's all kinds of ways you can do a backdoor pilot. So what this was it was an episode of the New York crime drama Naked City. If you've never seen Naked City, it's a great old black and white police procedural from the early 60s. And that was shot on location, Naked City. It was shot in New York. So if you watch it, you could see the New York of the late 50s and early 60s in all of its black and white glory. So the same creative team from Naked City tweaked the casting a little bit because one of the young lead actors tragically died at the age of 25 of cerebral hemorrhage between the backdoor and series pilots. Yeah, a guy named by the name of Robert Morris, no relation to me or, as far as I know, the university in Chicago. But Route 66 was also shot on location. So they would travel all over the country shooting in various places.
Wow.
To do this series, something that you really wouldn't see happen today.
Sounds expensive.
It wasn't limited to New York City, as the program was set in cities and towns all over the country. Now, the road Route 66 is rarely mentioned in the series. One source actually says it's only mentioned like 3 times for the entire 4-year run. And the episodes were actually set in more states than the highway itself passed through, plus one in Mexico and another one in Canada. And the program itself, which you can find on a number of streaming services, and it's also available, I think you can get it through Shout Factory and a couple other DVD series. The program rattles off an impressive list of guest stars, as did Naked City. But here's just a small list of the folks who appeared as guest stars on Route 66. Alan Alda, Cloris Leachman, Robert Redford, Robert Duvall, Joan Crawford, Beulah Bondi, Walter Matthau, Martin Sheen, Beatrice Straight, Joe Van Fleet, Jessica Walter, Rip Torn, Tuesday Weld, and Buster Keaton, among many, many others, appeared as guest stars. Quite a few Emmys and Oscars and Tonys and all kinds of things floating around there. Route 66 lasted an impressive 116 episodes over 4 seasons, because compared to the 22 episode seasons nowadays, they really went for it back then. You had a lot of episodes in a season. A downside to it is that author Jack Kerouac seriously considered legal action against the program's creators as an infringement on his book, On the Road. He felt that the ideas and concepts were kind of a ripoff because the main characters would take odd jobs.
Yeah, that was literally my first thought when you were talking about the premise of the show. I was like, Jack Kerouac. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now, limiting ourselves, unlike the show, just to the 8 states that the highway passes through, I've picked out from a couple of different websites here and books. Places you might want to check out if you do travel the original Route 66 someday in your itineraries around the country. So we'll take them state by state. Let's start with Illinois as you leave Chicago. Illinois claims 301 miles of the original Route 66, and you might want to stop in Springfield, Illinois at the Cozy Dog Restaurant. This is actually mentioned in a 3-part documentary. It's the birthplace of the idea of eating a hot dog on a stick that's been battered in cornmeal and deep fried.
Okay.
And what would we call that?
Corn dog.
Right. Yeah, you don't call it there. You'll get knifed if you call it that there. Well, you might not. But it's not a corn dog. Don't do that. It's called a Cozy Dog, and that's also the name of the restaurant.
Okay.
The Cozy Dog Restaurant in Springfield, Illinois. I don't think they'd knife you, but why take a chance?
Right.
Yeah, the famous Cozy Dog Restaurant in Springfield, Illinois. Now, as you drive along, you might want to have a little entertainment on the road, so you might stop at a drive-in theater. The 66 Drive-In Theater of Carthage, Missouri. State of Missouri claims 292 miles of Route 66. This drive-in theater is refurbished in 1998 and shows films on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. There used to be an astonishing 47 drive-in movie theaters along Route 66 in its heyday. Now, the latest number I have is 8. There's only 8
I'm surprised there are that many.
Right. Yeah, right. There's only 8 left, but that might be smaller these days. Next, we go through Kansas. Kansas claims the shortest stretch of Route 66, a mere 13 miles.
Wow.
It barely clips the state. However, it does have an interesting engineering item. The Rainbow Arch Bridge. It was designed by engineer James Barney Marsh. It's the only arch bridge of its type still extant along Route 66. And among engineering and bridge aficionados, James Barney Marsh is a huge name.
Mm-hmm.
He was also an engineer and architect of bridges who was one of the first to break the color barrier by hiring engineers of color in his firm way back in the 30s and 40s. And that Rainbow Arch Bridge is Kansas's, I think, the coolest thing there along that tiny 13-mile stretch of the highway. Boy, this next one. Oklahoma, 376 miles of Route 66 pass through the Sooner State, where you can see the blue whale of Catoosa. And I hope I'm saying that right. Catoosa, Oklahoma.
I've heard it is Catoosa. And I think I know what this is, but go ahead.
Oh, take a stab at it. What is it? What is the blue whale of Catoosa?
There's some story about a married couple, and the husband made a blue whale out of fiberglass in their backyard as a gift to his wife for their anniversary or something. And am I even remotely close?
Yeah, you are. And it was part of a swimming hole that led into a pond. Right. So it became part of it. They opened it up as a swimming hole park, which was part of a pond. Which I no thank you. I'd rather not do that. But it's still there. They've refurbished it, and you can visit the blue whale of Catoosa. I'm not sure you can still swim in that pond, but the blue whale is still there. This large blue whale. It's got a slide coming out of its side.
Right.
Stairs inside its mouth. I think it looks pretty cool, actually. Then we cut across the state of Texas. The largest state land-wise claims the second smallest number of miles, only 178 miles, cut right through the panhandle of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And just outside of Amarillo, Texas, is the magnificent Cadillac Ranch. And have you been to the Cadillac Ranch?
I have not. I've made that drive out that direction 1,000 times, but I've always managed to miss Cadillac Ranch. I always took a southerly route.
It is something to behold. I'm surprised you haven't visited, being a Bruce Springsteen fan. 10 Cadillacs buried up to their midsections upright in the earth, and you get to spray paint on them if you like. And there are shacks that sell spray paint just for that occasion. And they're basically up to their midsections with their tail fins out. You can walk amongst them. It's kind of Stonehenge-y. And it is really, really cool. I actually have a Cadillac Ranch t-shirt I wear quite often to the point where it's becoming my work t-shirt. And that's just outside of Amarillo, Texas. There's also a cool pair of legs that are statues that has the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley just outside of Amarillo,
nice.
Texas as well. We dip down into your favorite state, New Mexico, 380 miles of Route 66, where you can visit the El Rancho Hotel and Motel. Are you familiar with this place in your travels in New Mexico? It's in Gallup. I don't know how much time you spent in Gallup.
Practically none, so I don't know it.
It was built by the brother of film director D.W. Griffith. And it was a place for Golden Age Hollywood's elite to stay when filming out in the desert. It's 3 stories tall, and there's an incredible list of folks who've stayed there. I will not go through that list with you, but folks like Burt Lancaster, for example, stayed there back in the days at the El Rancho Hotel and Motel. And perhaps of all the things on this list, this might be my favorite because it's just really, really odd. As you go through Arizona, which has the most number of miles, 401 miles, you might get to go to Standing on the Corner Park.
Okay.
In Winslow, Arizona.
In Winslow, Arizona. Right.
A recent addition to Route 66 legacy, dedicated in 1999 from the Jackson Browne Penn song made famous by the fucking Eagles, man. It's Standing on the Corner Park from the song Take It Easy. Mm-hmm. Standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. I'm such a fine sight to see. It sounds like a cool little park, actually. It's just right there, like it is in the song, on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. Kind of an odd little bit of pop culture.
Yeah.
And finally, as you enter the Golden State, California, which claims 315 miles, you might be able, in Oro Grande, California, you might be able to visit Elmer Long's Bottle Tree Ranch. And Atlas Obscura has a nice little article about this, where you've got trees made out of scrap metal, and their leaves are made out of colored bottles.
Oh, cool.
So picture walking through a scrap metal forest where the leaves are these glinty, beautiful bottles just kind of hanging there on pieces of scrap iron. So those are about 8 cool things you can see along the old Route 66. Now, in 1985, the Route 66 designation was officially decommissioned. It was taken off the maps entirely, that it no longer existed. It had been replaced by Highway 55 and other things that the interstate system fully took over. Historical preservation societies popped up almost immediately for Route 66. The first one was Arizona's in 1987. In 1999, President Bill Clinton signed the National Route 66 Preservation Bill, and it provided $10 million in matching funds for any public grants that came up wanting to save stretches of Route 66. In 2008, the World Monument Fund added Route 66 to its list of World Monuments Watch, and I'm not sure quite exactly what that means, but it sounds impressive. The National Museum of American History in D.C. has an exhibit on Route 66. And there's currently the U.S. Route 66 Recommissioning Initiative, whose purpose is to return Route 66 to official highway status in federal mapping systems, which I find extremely interesting. And finally, the National Park Service, and there's a really nice, you can spend an hour or so on the NPS.gov website. The National Park Service has developed several travel itineraries under the subject of Discover Our Shared Heritage on Route 66. And they advise that a good rule of thumb, should you want to follow old Route 66 from Chicago to LA, don't use Google Maps or any other devices like that, because it will not do it. It will keep rerouting you. Right. It'll keep rerouting you to the main ones. You're going to need a good old fashioned paper map. And to do that, you can download some from nps.gov. And honestly, Bryan, I think I might do this some summer or maybe in the fall.
Yeah, I would totally do that.
Drive out to Chicago, start there at the pier or Lakeshore Drive, and just follow it as closely as I can all the way out to Santa Monica. And there are a few things that would get me to drive in Los Angeles, but Route 66 might be one of them.
Yeah, but
And
that's so fucking far, though. I mean, so in order to do that right, how long would that? I mean, in order to do it right and really enjoy it and see some of the sights, you would have to take 3 weeks, a month. I mean,
and you are limited to 55 miles an hour too on most of the roads. So,
right.
and it's
It'd be fun. It would take a
22
long, longest time.
2,200 miles.
Right.
And I think I would want to do it. I do not have a Corvette.
But
I
you
do not have a Corvette.
But do it in a convertible.
But I do have a 1957 Ford Thunderbird,
Right.
which is a convertible. So
Right.
that might be the way to do it. Sources for this: atlasobscuras.com's article on Elmer Long's Bottle Tree Ranch, epguides.com for info on the Naked City and Route 66 TV programs, David Halberstrom's 1993 book, The 50s, Fawcett Columbine on the Chevy Corporation sponsorship of Route 66 television show, nps.gov for info on the Route 66 maps, Route 66, 2012, a three-part documentary on Freevee directed by Peter Adler from Total Content Digital, Troy Taylor's 2005 book Weird Illinois from Barnes & Noble Publishing, and Wesley Treat, Heather Shade, and Rob Biggs' 2005 Weird Texas, a book I've used here before from Sterling Publishing, and of course, good old Wikipedia for basic info about mileage and whatnot on Route 66.
Excellent. Very cool.
When people talk about the good old days and make America great again, we all know that it wasn't great for most people, and probably it's true of things on Route 66, but that's the kind of stuff I think of. The idea of getting out on the open road and
right,
just seeing parts of America you never seen before. And I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. And I remember having long talks with my dad about one day maybe trying to find old segments of Route 66, because of course I have hopes that you would get on Route 66 and find old Burma shave signs, but we all know that
right.
probably
probably not. I nearly mentioned that. There is a town in, well, it only goes through 13 miles of Missouri, though, right?
Kansas.
Now, there's a town that I would swear is a Route 66 town that I was convinced you were going to mention, and now I'm thinking that it's not on Route 66. I may be confused, but there's a town with a funny story that I was going to use in a story sometime, so I'm not going to mention it here. But I will say, one time I was doing a pub quiz in Austin years ago, and one of the questions was, across from coast to coast, what country features Route 66? And everyone there wrote USA. And I went, no, England. It's England. Because most folks think that Route 66 here started somewhere on the East Coast, started in Philly or started in somewhere out there.
Nope.
But England actually does have a Route 66, is A66 or whatever, some letter in front of it. But there is a Route 66 in England that goes from coast to coast. And our group was the only group that got the answer right. Like, no, it's not. Route 66 here started in Chicago. Everyone knows that, but just no one in this bar does. Right.
Yeah, and my favorite version of the song still goes to the Rolling Stones. It's still my favorite version of Route 66.
Oh, I don't think I've heard that.
That's good.
Yeah, I have to check that out sometime.
It's from one of their early ones that I can never remember the order or the songs. It's one of their first 5 albums. Okay. Someone right now is screaming at it. It's from
Sticky Fingers, dumbasses.
It might be their very first one, actually. But anyway,
it would have to be one of the early ones. Yeah, very cool. Thank you. That was awesome.
So there you go. A look back at America's past, the Mother Road, Route 66 for Mother's Day.
Excellent. All right. Am I up?
Yes, and you're not a pervert. So well done.
Thank you so much. Starting off here, got a little curse word for you.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
The curse word this week is Mariko Aoki. Does that ring a bell at all? It's a woman's name.
No.
Okay. So Mariko Aoki, February 1985. She is 29 years old. living in Suganami near Tokyo. She sent a letter to a magazine about a problem she'd been having, and this letter would spark a fair amount of interest from many other people that, as it turns out, have the exact same problem. Mariko wrote in her letter, quote, "I'm not sure why, but since about 2 or 3 years ago, whenever I go to a bookstore, I am struck by an urge to move my bowels," unquote. The odd phenomenon does turn out to be comparatively widespread. And as a result of this publication, they got a bunch of other people saying they had the same, quote, condition. People that suffer from what's now called the Mariko Aoki phenomenon say that they have occasionally describe having an overwhelming, sudden, and unbearable urge to defecate, but only in bookstores. For some reason, this doesn't happen in libraries. Only bookstores. Some have claimed to have other symptoms, such as pain in the gut, a kind of heaving sensation near the rectum. And some people complain about that the problem is so debilitating for them that they have to get other people to buy books for them, or I guess they go on Amazon. So the root causes of the Mariko Aoki phenomenon, a Japanese TV show attempted to get people to, experience this phenomenon is this caused by the smell of ink? No luck there. Is this caused by the nature or manufacture of books or binding or paper or glue or something? Still nothing. Again, only bookstores are having this problem, and it's only the customers in the bookstores that are having this problem. Libraries don't have this issue, but neither do bookstore clerks. It's only the customers that are reporting this issue. So what's the root cause here? Is this like a reverse Pavlov's dog situation? Pavlov's dog, the dogs would hear a bell ring and they would instantly salivate because they had an association with food, and they would salivate. So sure. Is this a Pavlov situation in as much as do people have an immediate association with going to the bathroom and reading, because so many people do. I have a friend who I won't name in Austin who has a place in his master bathroom for his laptop. He reads so much. And he's camps out in there. I'm a recovering toilet reader. I don't do it anymore, but there are lots of folks who like to read on the John. But again, that doesn't quite account for account for everything, because this this isn't people in libraries, it's just in bookstores. So is this a frequency bias? Is this a people reading this and then thinking about it and going, you know what, I have that problem? Because that happens all the time too. There's a new restless leg syndrome, and everyone has restless leg syndrome. So people read about it and just thought, I have a very clear memory of that Barnes & Noble bathroom too.
Well, that happened with the Uruguayan rugby team too, when they crashed and had to eat each other. Suddenly everybody's like, well, right. I think I'm a cannibal. It's
right. So what it ultimately comes down to is the fact that they decide that the only probable cause, I don't know, probable, it's probably a bit of a stretch, is
swamp
that
gas.
Bookstores have a lot of books laying on their backs on tables, and so to pick up those books you have to lean forward at a 30 to 45 degree angle, and then that angle in the orientation of your large bowel and your rectum makes it conducive to want to go to the bathroom. So that's their best guess, but no one is absolutely certain. But Mariko Aoki is now immortalized forever with this condition.
So it's the standing equivalent of a squatty potty, is what they're saying. Is that the angle of the book?
Basically, so you're standing, you're pitched forward slightly, and then that angle is very friendly. So so there you have it. Her
couple
legacy.
Of things. I've got a lot of thoughts on this, Bryan.
I knew you would.
One, this used to happen to me all the time in graduate school.
In bookstores?
No, I had the library variation of this.
Oh, okay.
And I was trying to explain it to some fellow graduate students. And then one guy kind of comes up, he goes, "It happens to me too." And then another person comes up and I was like, "Yeah, it's like I'm there like 10 minutes. I don't know what it is, if it's the smell of the books, but suddenly it's like,
Right, everybody out.
I gotta go. I gotta go." And we all had the same, like, well, I use the fourth floor bathroom where all the geology maps are, because we had the School of Mines. That's where most of the folks who needed that stuff, they had their own library. So no one really used that bathroom in that part of the library. So it was nice for a nice, quiet, contemplative conference.
Right.
Two, do you think George Brett is a big reader?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And for people not getting that reference, I'm not sure what to tell you.
Three, do you ever notice how the Reader's Digest magazine is the perfect size to fit on the back of a toilet?
Right. Yes, that is the perfect size. And then the old David Letterman top 10
Reader's Digest. I'm sorry. The old,
wait a minute.
The
Letterman's books of top 10 list was exactly toilet size. Yeah, it was 4 inches by 10 inches.
So yes, I've never heard of this young lady, and that is an unfortunate thing. But
she's doomed.
I can't say that's something I do often in public anywhere, just because I don't. Public bathrooms are kind of. But wow, I did have a library equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did have a buddy who worked in a large bookstore in Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
And they were often visited by someone that he referred to as the mad shitter, because they would leave the men's room in an incredible, it resembled a toxic waste dump by the time this guy was done with it. I mean, I walked up front and I was like, and I had to look at my face, and he looks up at me, goes, "Mad shitter?" And I was like, "Yes, I don't know what happened in there, but it was not me." And it was awful.
Oh my
God.
God.
Man, that's like the third time this week. And I was like, "Oh my God." So I don't know what it is, the correlation between.
Yes. The natural laxative that is literature.
Well, on that perfectly disgusting note.
All right.
That might be the worst. That might be the worst curse word. Well, yeah, that was pretty bad, Bryan.
It's up there. Yeah.
Or down there. Yeah.
Okay. So for my story, this is an oldie but a goodie in terms of conspiracy stories. I kind of hate most conspiracy stories, as I think you know, because for a number of reasons, but mostly because there's always someone who kind of takes the conspiracy 1,000% too far. But I do like stories that are kind of fun to think about and speculate and interesting to ponder. When some folks are always overly enthusiastic and sort of buy in too much, it sort of sucks the fun out of it for me. But this is one of the stories that falls into that category, and is Paul McCartney dead story.
Oh.
So if you go on Google, and when I started researching this, of course I spent a fair amount of time looking at all kinds of things. If you just Google "Paul is dead" in quotation marks, you get 5.5 million results. This is a bottomless pit. I'm not even going to attempt to present this completely, but this was a bit of a request. It was kind of on my radar screen in slightly different fashion, but this was a bit of a request from Bay Area Brad. Had emailed in at one point and suggested Paul is dead. So this is for you, Brad. So the Beatles, as you know, came to be late 50s, early 60s. They're cruising along. They managed to release their first 3 albums and a number of singles before the conspiracy hit. And then came the album Help. So you might be able to picture the cover artwork for Help. All 4 of them are sort of in kind of blue jumpers. 3 of them, Paul is not wearing a hat, but the other 3 are wearing hats, and they spell out in semaphore a word, and that word, as it turns out, is not the word help. They spell out NUJV, and everyone assumes it was help in semaphore, but it's not. And NUJV, someone decided that NUJV stood for New Unknown John Vocalist, because people are nuts. So why is there a new vocalist? Well, because John had obviously died. There's no real explanation, because with these types of stories, there never is. And of course, John is pictured very clearly on the cover. And who is this new vocalist, etc. But there you go. So they spelled out NUJV on the cover of Help because a guy named Robert Freeman, who was the photographer, didn't like the way Help looked graphically. And so he just kind of arranged them in a pleasing fashion. And it just so happens it spells NUJV. It doesn't mean anything. When the same record came out in North America, because it was released, it was on Capitol Records in North America. Someone decided, someone had this grand scheme that they wanted to rearrange those letters again, and took the existing photograph and just moved a couple of the guys so that Paul was on the right end, and Paul's doing the J. And in this orientation, his right hand is straight up, and his left hand is basically at 3:00, and so his left hand is pointing directly at the Capitol Records logo. So in North America, it's NVUJ instead, just because some exec at Capitol wanted that. There's no conspiracy. It's just, it's nothing to get too worked up over. So one of the two big ones that has a lot of these references is Sgt. Pepper's. So there's a whole bunch of graphical things here. Most of these you probably will have at least heard of, that are supposed to point to Paul being dead. On the back of the album, where all the lyrics are, it's basically a red background. The four of them are pictured bottom center, and facing the camera. But Paul is second from left, but he's the only one who's facing. His back is to the camera. For some reason, he's like 5 inches taller than them, and I don't think he was 6'7". So he must be standing on something as well. On the front of the album, allegedly, I mean, this is the famous artwork that is the Madame Tussauds waxworks, and so there is W.C. Fields and Sonny Liston and Bob Dylan, maybe Marilyn Monroe, I think, maybe even Mae West, a whole bunch of other people, and then also immediately so the four of them are center. Immediately to the left is supposedly the four of them again, seemingly as teenagers, all dressed in black, kind of in mourning. They look like they're mourning. So that's supposed to be them graveside. Then down front, there is this, I wouldn't say bouquet, but this arrangement of yellow flowers that were in the shape of a bass guitar, allegedly a bass guitar. It looks vaguely like a guitar, but you can't really tell if it is left-handed or right-handed. But again, because it's oriented to the left, because Paul's a lefty, that this is Paul's guitar. And so, here we go again.
Yeah,
Paul is dead.
I see it. Yep.
Okay.
I've got all my Beatles records out for those of you listening at home. And
Nice. Sorry, guy. That makes it way easier. But we'll post them in there for reference. So on Sgt. Pepper's, the concept of Sgt. Pepper's was apparently mostly Paul's sort of idea. He had this idea of them being a fictitious band where they were not themselves anymore. They weren't the Beatles. They were Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And he had the vision for this militaristic style uniform. His uniform, I believe it's Paul's uniform in the picture that's in the centerfold. He's wearing a patch that reads OPP, the patch he got from the Ontario Provincial Police when they visited Canada on tour. But the whole thing was kind of just an umbrella theme under which they could make different music, newer music that was much more experiential and not the sort of love me do straight skiffle sort of pop stuff they had done early on. At the beginning of the first track, and I'm not sure, I don't know how much of a Beatles fan are you?
Well, I've got a shitload of records at my feet right now.
Okay. So at the very end of the opening track, Paul is basically introducing Ringo mentions the one and only Billy Shears and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and then Billy Shears, who's Ringo's star, starts into the song With a Little Help from My Friends. So Ringo is Billy Shears. That's his alter ego for this record. So remember that. We're going to come back to Billy Shears here in a second. The other big one that has a lot of these references is Abbey Road. If you go on YouTube, I think that's where I saw it. You can actually see an interview with Paul where he's talking about the photo shoot that they had for that artwork. And apparently there had been some discussion in the days or weeks prior that they were going to take some trip to do promotional work and do the album artwork, some distance away, but it was going to take several days to go do there and then do the photo shoot. But they were in Abbey Road Studios working on the album. The album was close to being done. And so, according to Paul, in at least one interview, they decided to just step outside kind of on a lark, just said, let's knock this thing out now, right here, right now. And so they tackled this photo shoot. In the photo on the cover of Abbey Road, again, Paul is allegedly dead. He's the corpse. So the story is John, who is far right, is all in white. John is the minister. Ringo is in all black. Ringo is the undertaker. Paul's obviously the dead body. And George, all in denim, is the grave digger. You'll also notice that they're all out of step. They're all at full stride, but George, Ringo, and John are leading with their left foot. Paul is leading with his right foot. And Paul is also barefoot, and his eyes are closed in the photo. So, therefore dead. If you Google this image,
I say he did. I say he did.
If you Google this image, you'll actually find there are two different versions of the image. I think it's the case that the initial UK release, Paul has the cigarette in his right hand, but later releases, both in the UK and in the States, the cigarette's airbrushed out. There's no cigarette.
I've got the cigarette one. I've got the cigarette one. Yeah.
Okay. And then so one more. There's I don't have it in front of me. I just have my notes up. There is a car with a license plate that reads 28 if.
Yeah, it's a Volkswagen Bug. Yeah,
Volkswagen, a white Volkswagen Bug. I think it's white. So that's 20 if, and so that's of course means that Paul would have been 28 if he had lived. Of course, this record came out when Paul was 27. Details. Don't let that ruin a perfectly good conspiracy. And then you can dive into, if you wanted to, all of the lyrics that seem to point to this conspiracy. And this is, again, because this conspiracy, has been around now for more than 50 years and is so vast, you could, waste your life researching this. Revolution Number 9 is where where the lyrics are "Turn Me On, Dead Man." Then the other one that's often mentioned is toward the end of Strawberry Fields. John allegedly sings the words "I buried Paul," although he claims immediately afterwards that what he's actually saying there is cranberry sauce. And one more reference to artwork on the cover of Let It Be. You have John, Ringo, and George. It's basically there's 4 individual shots of the 4 of them. John, Ringo, and George are top left, bottom right. The 3 of them are all kind of in profile, looking to the side with white backgrounds. Paul is top right. His background is red, and he's not looking directly at the camera, but he is full face, and so he's looking straight out. And so looking straight out plus red background equals dead, obviously. Duh. This conspiracy is interesting and funny, but at the same time sort of frustrating because other people just have to ruin it. And it can be a staggering time suck. Part of what I thought what was the sort of genesis of this is Paul apparently did in fact wreck a moped in December of '65 and chipped a tooth and kind of had a fat lip. Apparently looked like he'd been beaten up or something. And that was the impetus behind him when he first started growing out mustache and beard, was to cover up kind of having a fat face and a chipped tooth. And then at some point the following year, he had a car accident which was apparently minor, but the combination of the two, for those that were conspiracy minded, just added up to Paul was dead. And then this conspiracy begins to gain traction. And so it really wound up fueling, I mean, it was an instant conspiracy, and it wound up fueling popularity for the Abbey Road record in the 60s. And so, by the time the White Album came out, it was, on college campuses especially, people were talking about this like crazy. And so, even at the time, before the Beatles broke up, all of them were being asked this question all the time. And of course, they all completely and aggressively for a while refute this, like, what the hell are you talking about? Here's Paul, he's right here. We're working on the next, whatever is that they're working on. And it was just constant. And then eventually they kind of just gave up and said, at this point, it's got a life of its own. We have to basically just, leave it alone. At some point in the last couple of years, McCartney was on with James Corden, and James Corden, who is my kryptonite. I don't like that man and don't think he's funny, but McCartney went on there with his carpool karaoke, and Corden asked him about all the Paul is dead nonsense, and Paul basically said again then the exact same thing, which was this thing just was a wildfire almost instantaneously, and we just there was nothing we could do about it. And so we just had to leave it alone, and it had basically had a life of its own. One of the aspects of it, so I mentioned early on Billy Shears. Billy Shears was the fictitious character that Ringo Starr was playing as part of Sgt. Pepper's, and that's all. But if you do a little bit more digging into Billy Shears, it turns out he's a whole host of people, because there are this thing is so bizarre, and people have owned it so thoroughly that there are a whole host of little sub conspiracies that are off of it. Billy Shears doesn't exist. He is not a real person, but according to some people, he is a session musician that the Beatles used occasionally, who may have been named Billy Shears, but also may have been named William Shepard, and he also happened to be left-handed. Or Billy Shears is a childhood friend of Paul's that also just happened to have an uncanny resemblance to Paul, and then could take his place. Or Billy Shears was, and this is slightly plausible in as much as I believe this contest may have happened. He was allegedly the winner of one of several different Paul McCartney lookalike contests. And so one conspiracy goes, Paul McCartney dies, they have to find someone to replace him. They then go and hire this Billy Shears guy who looks a lot like him and just won the lookalike contest, and we'll train him to fill the spot. So all of this nonsense was, obviously way before the internet. And so advancing these conspiracies was much, much more difficult. You really had to work at it. You couldn't just put up, the clickbait top 10 list, top 10 reasons Paul McCartney is dead. Number 7 will amaze you. Number 3 will blow your mind. You couldn't do that. But I did find a flyer now in PDF form that, is advancing this theory, and is very, very clearly showing a picture of Paul McCartney in 65 right next to a picture of Paul McCartney in 67. But it's someone went to the trouble of labeling it Paul McCartney and Billy Shears. Like, this is a legitimate thing, but it's obviously complete crap. It's just just absolute insanity. Somehow people really owned this, and felt as though, why would anyone go to this much trouble? Celebrities die sometimes, and there are people, again, if you're willing to read the bottomless pit that's out there, they really think that the UK or the world would have been so distraught at the death of Paul McCartney that they went to the trouble of getting MI5 involved to make sure that this transition could take place, and Paul's body was, who knows what happened to Paul's body, and this new person just was able to fill his shoes, and of course that's completely insane, because you couldn't, you couldn't really even do that. Even if you had someone, if you and I looked exactly alike and I dropped dead, there's no way for you to take over my identity. That's, you know, you could change your name to Bryan Treat if you really, really wanted to, but that doesn't make just every aspect of this is just complete nonsense. But the fact that there are so many folks that think, you know, all this was done is just bonkers to me, because it's just impossible legally, ethically, logistically. It couldn't really have happened. And this is the other example that I was sort of drawn to, that I remember sort of seeing this whenever these conspiracy stories come up and people are presenting their different versions of it. This happened a lot after 9/11. There would be some story would come out that had a microscopic kernel of truth, and then, or with Princess Diana died, you would see the National Enquirer version, which would have, again, have a very, very small level of journalistic integrity, and their version of a story would be that when Princess Diana died, someone overheard her saying something like she was suicidal and wanted to be dead. The next version of that, the next rag or tabloid right next to that one on the shelf, is the middle of the road version, which is Diana was depressed, and by the way, she was also pregnant with twins when she died. And then the third version of that is she was depressed and she was pregnant, but she was pregnant with alien babies. Right? It's just the final last step of the complete insanity. Lost my spot.
When alien babies? All two of them. Both of them.
So, I mean, the other aspect of the story that also has its own side branch is, so on the cover of Help, they didn't spell help, they spelled NUJV, and you can just hear in their tone of voice this sanctimonious, well, of course you realize that thus and such. It's noted repeatedly how the NUJV happened and how it happened by accident. But if you dive into it deep enough, you will see multiple places where people will say, oh yeah, by the way, no, it's not NUJV. If you take that image and you reverse all four of them, because the photos were flipped, and then you rearrange the four of them into their proper order, which would always be Paul, John, George, Ringo. That then spells LPUS, which is help us. So the obvious answer is that's what they were trying to do. It wasn't some mistake. It was extra, crazy top secret level of, like, oh my God, get a job. I mean, how have you ever been late in your life? How are you, getting lost and like, oh my God, shut up. But this is just the extent to which this is a crazy and wildly complex story. And I mean, some conspiracy things are sort of interesting and can be enjoyable to sort of talk about. I mean, there are 99.95% of them are based completely in wishful thinking and in this need for some folks to see patterns or find meaning in things that are random, I guess. We've talked about this a lot in the past, more in sort of that Dunning-Kruger effect side of things. But, there are books out there and articles out there and all this material out there that take that Diana with the alien babies approach and say, well, yeah, in 1981, Ringo Starr was quoted as saying, well, we were devastated when Paul died. No, he never said that. Why are you making shit up to further this story? And the story is so stupid. Why would you care? Why are you this invested in a story that is irrelevant? Paul McCartney is perfectly alive. Here he is. So let it go. But some people just can't do it. But if you want to dive into this, it is hilarious from a sociological standpoint to dive into this bottomless pit and go, how do you have the time to get lost into this?
I think it's a great story. It's one of my favorites in all of rock and roll, in all of popular music, just because it does get to that point where I remember hearing about it as a teenager and just loving it as a teenager
Right.
because it was just something. One, it was something to do. Two, it really kind of gets back to that idea that album artwork is important.
Mhm.
And that's something that old album art just, I mean, those old album covers, they're fantastic. And
Right.
they really draw you into what's going on. And something like, I mean, those Beatles album covers just show that, especially Sergeant Pepper's, really tell a story before you even get a chance to listen to the music, inside the sleeve.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
And so you can start making up your own little stories about what you're seeing. um, and I remember hearing. Did you see anything about Magical Mystery Tour? Because
No, I
the
didn't actually.
covered a Magical Mystery Tour. The Walrus Was Paul is on there,
Right.
and
Mhm.
I remember hearing that. Well, the walrus is a symbol of death in certain what we would call
Oh,
Inuit
yeah.
cultures. I remember hearing that one. I also remember hearing that if you held the album cover upside down and backwards in a mirror, the Beatles and the Stars would spell out a phone number you could call that gave you a recording about. But on the inside of the inside of the album, as you open it up, you see the Beatles and they're wearing white tuxedos and they're all wearing red roses except Paul, who's wearing a black
Black
rose. And
Rose.
that's
Oh, yeah, I remember that
that's
one
that
now.
is
Yeah.
I just looked at it. That's still in there. That's still
Right.
in the album artwork. So it's just little shit like that where you can just be like, you know, you can see how it got out of hand. You can see how it got out of hand with kids, but when adults start doing it, you're like, okay, wait a minute. Let's take it. It's kind of like how all these people claim to have cracked the Zodiac codes with the Zodiac murder, who are like, well, okay, we cracked it, but see, we just cracked it, and that one's an anagram, so we have to rearrange the letters and
Right.
crack it again. It's like, okay, see, I think you're seeing what you want to see at that point.
Yeah,
But I
and
could
what
be
is
wrong.
that? I'm still just mystified by that. It's like, okay, a lot of this story is a lot of most stories that spiral out of control is a microscopic kernel of truth that folks just can't seem to deal with the fact that a lot of life and a lot of things is random and dumb luck and has and there is no pattern and there is no conscious thought that went into it. A lot of this Beatles story, I'm convinced, is just stupid random dumb luck and stupid things that people endeavoring to find meaning where there is no meaning, and or maybe the band maybe the Black Rose, Paul wearing the Black Rose and the others are not, it's them just, well, let's fuck with our fans a little bit, just for the hell of it. That's more likely than him being dead.
Well, there's also
he's in the picture, how is he dead?
there's also the hand that's above his head in the Sergeant Pepper's
Oh
cover.
yeah.
There's a hand
Yeah.
that's a symbol of death. It's like, well, anything is okay. I also remember that set some of my friends off and I in high school because we were convinced that the REM album covers hit a clue to the fact that they were about to break up because Document had the number 5 on the front, and then on I think on the track listing for Green, which was the next album, it didn't have the number 4 on it. It had something else. It had like the letter R or something instead of putting the number 4. So we were convinced they were counting down to when they were breaking up, that they had 3 albums left after Green. And so we would look for clues for all this stuff. But again, high school junior. So,
right.
Anyway,
how did you find the time? Do
That's
something
why
else. Go outside.
That's why I was no good at math, because I was busy doing that stuff. Oh, that's good shit, Bryan.
So
Thank
Paul
you,
is dead.
Thank you, Bay Area Brad.
Yeah.
If that is your name.
Yeah, a wildly incomplete summary of it. I mean, Google that, and I was blown away by. I mean, some of that I'd obviously heard, but I did not know about help not spelling. We're not spelling.
I never heard that one. I never heard that part of it ever.
And then the fact that it's a different random. It says in 100 places that the photographer, it was just a happenstance. And then people just, of course, fill in the blanks and, oh, God, what's it mean? Oh my God. Let's obsess over this.
Well, that's another great dead beetles defecating in bookstores, blue whales. We're another fine episode of Dream Idiots, if I do say so myself. So
yeah, thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate it. Like and share and subscribe and do those things. We had a huge spike in downloads in the last week or so, which is great to see. Thanks for tagging along with us. We appreciate it.
yep, and we'll see you next time. And as always, be good to each other. Bye.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong,
Mhm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.